Welcome back on this Sunday morning. Our next guest is a Republican candidate for governor. She is Erin Stewart, now 31 years old, in her third term as mayor of New Britain, the hardware city, and she recently chose Peter Tessie as her running mate. And Mayor Stewart is with us this Sunday morning, and good to see you back here, Mayor.
Good morning. Great to be here, as always.
Let's talk a little bit about some of your endorsements that you've gotten recently, and I want to talk about former Congresswoman Nancy Johnson and the former mayor of Hartford, Ann Uccello. What did those women tell you in terms of the advice that they gave you?
Well, two very different stories. So Nancy Johnson, my former boss, she was my first boss in politics in 2006 when I worked for her. Nancy has always been a big supporter of mine. She always stops in the office all the time just to check in, see how it's going, but someone who I can call on all the time to ask for advice. Nancy spent many, many years in Congress. She's always been an advisor to me. She always told me, you go for what you want, and you do what you want to do, and always make sure that your passion is there, because as long as you have passion, you're going to be successful in what you do. Ann, on the other hand, had a very different story. And for those of you that might be familiar with Ann's story, she was mayor of Hartford, but she wanted to run for governor, actually, and they had President Nixon call her to talk her out of running for governor, to talk her into running for Congress, and she did. And so when I got to meet with Ann, she told me that that was probably the one regret that she had in her political career, was that she didn't go for the job that she wanted. So there's a great article about my conversation with her, and she told me, you go for it, you don't let anybody stop you.
And the convention is coming up, as you know, next week, and I know that you've been, working with your staff to try to get enough delegate support to qualify for the primary. You chose Peter Tessie, the first selectman of Greenwich, as your running mate. How has it yielded any fruit in terms of support among delegates?
Oh, sure. I think it certainly turned some heads when we decided to make that announcement. But Peter and I are very good friends. We both represent very different areas of the state, but when you look at the areas that we represent, it becomes sort of a microcosm of the entire state of Connecticut, with the constituency that I have and that he has. Oftentimes, I think that you find these shotgun marriages when you have the governor paired up with the lieutenant governor, whoever may receive the nomination. For me, I feel it's I need to feel comforted in knowing that the person that would be, my partner in this is someone that I can see eye to eye with, that I'm on the same page with. That's not to say that I wouldn't work with anybody else, but Peter's just a great choice, and I think he does our party very, very well.
Because the way the state law works, it's not really up to you, it's up to the voters, and in many cases they choose a different lieutenant governor and a different gubernatorial candidate. Do you expect to leave that convention as the endorsed candidate?
As the endorsed candidate, no. But I expect to leave that convention going on to the primary ballot.
With 15%, at least 15%.
Absolutely, absolutely. And there's a lot of talk going on right now about the rules and how the ballots are going to work, and it's going to be a heck of a weekend, I can tell you that much.
Do you think the party will have an endorsed candidate?
I think it depends on how many ballots they decide to go with. There's 9, 10 candidates going for governor in this race. They're going to keep going and going, and at some point the Rules Committee will have to set the drop-off levels. I think the only thing that we've heard thus far is that first ballot, if you don't receive 8% of the vote, you don't move on to the next ballot. We'll see how the Rules Committee makes that decision.
What's your hunch tell you in terms of how many people will leave that convention with enough delegates to make the ballot? I mean, some are saying, David Walker here last week said there'll be 4 candidates. Tim Earp said there'll be 4.
Well, I think that there could be 4 or 5 that do leave with enough, with 15%. However, then you have to talk about those that have said that they're going to bypass the convention altogether and petition on. And there's 4 candidates that have already pulled petitions that are going to start that process. It's a very long and difficult process, but that could leave even more candidates on the primary ballot. It's going to be an interesting summer, and I'm looking forward to being a part of that.
Let's go back to Mayor Uccello's story just a little bit.
Sure.
What kind of things have been said to you to try to get you out of the race or to run for something else?
You name it, it's been said. And I think that's a reality. I think everyone has tried to talk me out of doing what my passion is, and I kind of always take it back to when I first ran for mayor of the city of New Britain. I ran for mayor knowing that I was taking the biggest risk of my life and the biggest risk of my career, because I knew that I could make a difference. Doing the same exact thing now. I know that the talents and the skill set that I bring are going to benefit the state of Connecticut in ways that we haven't seen in many years, and I'm confident in that. I wouldn't be running for an office that I didn't feel passionately about. And, a lot of people had encouraged me to run for something on an under ticket, but the one thing that I said to them is the worst thing you can have is a candidate on the ballot that doesn't feel passionately about what they're doing, because they're not going to be connected throughout the campaign, and that's not me.
There have been a few columnists who've criticized you for being less than specific about some of the things you'd like to do if elected governor. Why should they elect Erin Stewart? And on this program, I asked you, what you do in the first 100 days, and you were a little bit vague about it. Have you given it to more thought as to really what this state needs and what kind of changes that you would make right off the bat?
Absolutely. So we put together my 10-point vision for the state of Connecticut. It's on my website if anyone watching wants to check it out.
Give us some highlights.
But it really talks about the 10 things that the state of Connecticut needs to focus on. We know we need to focus on growing our economy by building an environment where businesses can thrive. We know that the most pressing issue with the budget is our unfunded pension liabilities and getting that under control. I talked about taking that and removing the governor's office from the process of being part of that funding mechanism altogether, moving it into a quasi-public agency, funding it with a different funding source so politics is removed, people's pensions are funded, and we can keep ensuring that we pay for them. You've got to talk about housing stock, the crumbling foundation issue. You've got to talk about so many things. Within your first 100 days, the governor is going to be faced with coming together with a budget. That's the first and foremost. Short-term, long-term problems. That's the short-term problem. We're going to have to get our hands deep down into that budget and start cutting our way out.
I want to ask you the same question I asked Ned Lamont just a few minutes ago, who was on the program a little bit earlier, and that is, what kind of line or what kind of campaign message would you send out to people if perhaps you were running against him or whoever the Democratic nominee might be, as to why they shouldn't go with a Democrat and instead go with you?
I think it's time for a new generation of leadership, and I think that it's my generation that I said needs to step up to the plate and start taking control of our state and taking back our state, and I certainly think that I can lead us there.
Where did Republicans go wrong last time? Do you think the state would have been better off if Tom Foley had been elected in 2010?
I certainly do. However, I think that Republicans, we need to understand that we only make up 22% of the electorate in the state. So unless we do something different, put forth a different kind of candidate that has broad appeal to Democrats and especially unaffiliated voters, we're going to be hard-pressed to be successful in November and carry the coattails with us that we need. And that's where I know that I'd be the best team captain we've ever had.
I want to ask you a little bit about the cities. Obviously, you're the mayor of one, but you and some other mayors, including Tony Harp and Joe Ganim, were a little upset at the Hartford bailout proposal that was put together by the governor's office. What would you have done differently? Would you have let the city go bankrupt?
So it's a very frustrating, frustrating feeling for me, knowing because of the situation that I walked into in the city of New Britain with a $30 million deficit, and I was told, you can file for bankruptcy, here you go. No one hesitated to tell me to file for bankruptcy, but they didn't want the capital city to do so. Now, I can see both sides of that. I can see why it would be embarrassing to let Hartford go bankrupt, but I can also see why it would be a good thing as well. And it's okay to fail sometimes. I think we have to realize that. It's okay to fail. It would have been okay. The one thing that I would have changed is that the Municipal Accountability Review Board, I don't think really has sunken its teeth too far into the city of Hartford's problems to really help them solve that structurally long term. I certainly hope that Mayor Bronin can be successful in his endeavor to do so.
Erin Stewart, Republican candidate for governor, we thank you for coming on the program, and best of luck next week at the convention.
Thank you very much.
When we come back, we'll talk with Mark Pasniokis about what will happen at those conventions, in his judgment anyway, and we welcome your comments. You can find me on Instagram, Facebook, or Twitter right now.